Қазақстан Республикасының президенті елбасы Нұрсұлтан Назарбаев. President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Astana. Welcome to the 6th Astana Economic Forum. My name is Stefan Grobe. I'm with Euronews in Washington. And I am delighted to be here. It is a great honor to say hello to all of you in this stunning city and at this fabulous venue, which is the Palace of Independence. For the 6th time running, some of the world's leading financial and economic experts, most distinguished public servants and politicians, heads of international organizations and regional associations come together in the capital of Kazakhstan, one of the most vibrant countries not only in this part of the world. In the 6 short years since it was founded, the Astana Economic Forum has grown into a major international and regional platform for dialogue. This year's event is playing host again to more than 9,000 delegates representing 132 countries, participating in 60+ events aimed at promoting broad discussions on economic issues and solutions for the challenges facing our societies. The forum is honored by the presence of the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who initiated this gathering 6 years ago by creating the Eurasian Economic Club of Scientists, and who continues to make recommendations in pursuit of the global Millennium Development. For example, it was President Nazarbayev who launched the G-Global Initiative in 2011, a widely praised new format of global cooperation and collaboration. Mr. President, thank you for your hospitality and thank you for bringing us all together again. I am looking forward to your thoughts, ideas, and leadership this year. This year's forum is going to see a special highlight: the first World Anti-Crisis Conference under the auspices of the United Nations, dedicated to the principal issues of global development and to paths to balance economic growth. Joining President Nazarbayev at this opening plenary segment this morning is a group of distinguished public servants who I would like to welcome on the stage. The President of the United Nations General Assembly, Vuk Jeremic. The Prime Minister of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Nikola Gruevski. The President of the United Nations Economic and Social Council, Nestor Osorio. The United Nations Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Wu Hongbo. The Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Supachai Panichpakti. The Foreign Minister of Fiji and Chair of the G77 in China at the United Nations, Ratu-Inoke Kubwabola. the Chairman of the Board of the Eurasian Economic Commission, Viktor Kristenko, the President of the Islamic Development Bank, Ahmad-Mohamed-Ali Al-Madani, and from Columbia University, the Nobel laureate in economics 1999, Robert Mundell. So, we have an outstanding opening plenary to discuss the challenges facing the world economy today. What are these challenges and key issues? Perspectives of sustained global economic growth, infrastructure and innovative technologies, competitiveness in international markets, social aspects of economic growth, financial systems, global risks and countermeasures, and much more. These are a lot of topics that go to the heart of the matter. Whether the forum will be successful again depends entirely on you, my fellow delegates, on your energy, on your passion, and on your commitment. But I'm sure that we're going to see a lot of creativity this week that will ultimately drive the global conversation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have the great honor to welcome the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, His Excellency Nursultan Nazarbayev.
Құрметті форумға қатынасушылар, ханымдар мен мырзалар. Қонақжай қазақ елінің астанасына хош келдіңіздер дейміз. Астана экономикалық форумы 5 жылдан бері тұрақты өткізіліп келеді. Форум өткізу тәсілі тұрғысынан да, мазмұны жағынан да ерекше сұхбаттастық алаңына айналды. Біріншіден, оның дағдарыспен күрестің жаһандық жоспарын жасауға ұмтылысы, Біріккен ұлттар ұйымы бас ассамблеясының 67-ші сессиясының қолдауына ие болды. 6-шы Астана форуммен қатар Біріккен ұлттар ұйымының аясында тұңғыш рет дүниежүзілік дағдарысқа қарсы күрес жөніндегі конференция өткізіліп отыр. Оған 100-ден астам мемлекет қатынасуда. Айтулы жиынға қатынасушыларға шынайы сәлем жолдай отырып, оған қолдау білдірген үшін Біріккен ұлттар ұйымының жетекшілігі мен оның құрымдағы бөлімдеріне ризашылығымды айтқым келеді. Екіншіден, форум ашылғаннан бері 5 жылда оған қатынасушылардың саны күрт артты. Бүгінгі форум мен конференция 10 мыңнан астам қатынасушысының, оның ішінде 132 елден келген 3 мыңға жуық шетелдік қонақтың басын қосып отыр. Үшіншіден, мен Астанада өз клубтарын құрғандар үшін және форумға барынша қолдау білдіріп белсене қатысқандар үшін ғұлама ғалымдарымыз Нобель сыйлығының иегерлеріне айрықша ықыласымды білдіремін. Төртіншіден, G-Global'дың интернетте коммуникативтік алаңынан қызметі Астана форумын үздіксіз онлайн талқылаудың орталығына айналдырды. Оған ғаламдық желінің 120 мыңнан астам тұрақты қатынасушылар қатынасады. Бесіншіден, Астана форумының әлеуеті арта түскеніне басқа да аймақтар арқылы көз жеткізуге болады. Мысалы, 1 жыл бұрын мен бұл осы мінбеден G-Global атты 21 ғасырдың жаңа әлемдік құрылымы идеясын ұсынған едім. Бүгінгі таңда тек Google ақпарат іздеу жүйесінің өзі осы терминге қатынасты миллиардқа жуық сілтеме жасайды. Мен Астана экономикалық форум мен дүниежүзілік дағдарысқа қарсы күрес конференция аясындағы пікірталастардың қорытындысын аймақтық және жаһандық деңгейдегі сұраныстың арта түсеріне сенімдімін. Уважаемые дамы и господа, я хотел бы поделиться своим видением актуальных проблем, выносимых на обсуждение настоящего форума. Прежде всего, важных концептуальных антикризисных подходов. Активизируя процесс разработки глобального антикризисного плана, необходимо учесть ряд принципиально важных уроков, преподнесенных миру последние годы. Извиняюсь. Судите сами. Еще в конце прошлого года почти все в мире были убеждены в том, что первый всеобщий кризис глобализированной экономики 21 века – это уже перевернутая страница истории. В этом нас настойчиво убеждали многие финансовые институты, но эйфории не получилось. Обвал финансовой системы на Кипре заставил усомниться в близости эры всеобщей экономической стабильности. Я знаю, что есть оценки, отвергающие связь кипрского инцидента с глобальным кризисом, но факт остается фактом. Даже неискушенный в экономике обыватель легко назовет схожие причины проблем кипрских банков, обвала американских ипотечных агентств пятилетней давности. Это прежде всего искусственное раздувание финансовых пузырей, жажда легких денег, отсутствие должной ответственности национальных финансовых институтов, слабость глобального финансового управления. По сути, эти и другие фундаментальные причины глобального кризиса до сих пор не устранены. А это означает, что глобальный кризис нельзя считать завершенным. Более того, похоже, что он переходит в новую стадию, которая будет сопровождаться болезненными взрывами ряда локальных финансовых систем. Считаю, что это и есть первый урок, который следует усвоить и учесть в выработке глобального антикризисного плана. Второй урок заключается в том, что глобальные рецессии ведут, как это ни парадоксально, антикризисные меры, предпринимаемые на национальных уровнях. Безусловно, в период любого кризиса действие лучше бездействия. Казахстан, как известно, также осуществил успешную антикризисную программу. Она позволила сохранить рабочие места, позитивную динамику экономического роста. Далеко не все антикризисные рекомендации, выработанные в рамках группы G20, были реализованы. Так, многие государства осуществили протекционистские меры. Это привело к замедлению темпов роста мировой торговли, снижению цен на глобальных региональных рынках. Упали объемы трансграничного кредитования, инвестиций. Сейчас они составляют лишь 60% до кризисного уровня. Другой аспект – резкое ухудшение социального самочувствия людей. Растет глобальная безработица. По прогнозу Международной организации труда, уже в этом году в мире будет свыше 200 миллионов безработных. В начале этого года в Европе насчитывалось более 26 миллионов безработных, что в 1,5 раза больше, чем 5 лет назад. Многие государства сокращают расходы на образование, медицину, развитие человеческого потенциала. Все это явные признаки глобального социального кризиса, угрожающего снижением планки стандартов качества жизни даже в развитых сообществах. По подсчетам оксфордских экспертов, половина всех малообеспеченных людей планеты живет именно в странах G20. 250 миллионов человек вынуждены мигрировать в поисках лучшей доли, что тоже порождает массу социальных проблем. Наблюдаемая ныне во многих странах социальная несправедливость – это прямое следствие финансово-экономической неэффективности. Национальные антикризисные планы смягчили последствия кризиса, но за ними не последовало эффективных корневых действий на глобальном уровне. В своей статье «Ключи от кризиса и других», опубликованной 4 года назад, я назвал дефектность мировой валютной системы самой главной причиной текущей мировой экономической бури. Напомню, что я настойчиво призывал изменить порядок эмиссии обращения мировой валюты, который не отвечает критериям законности, потому что никакой орган его не принимал, международной демократичности, эффективной контролируемости и ответственности. Но до сих пор нет ни эффективных глобальных антикризисных механизмов, ни надежной мировой резервной валюты или группы региональных валют. Для принятия кардинальных решений не было проявлено достаточной воли и ответственности. Третий урок, который важно учесть при работе над глобальным антикризисным планом, связан с преодолением дефицита доверия. Я полностью разделяю мнение о том, что глобальный кризис стал прежде всего кризисом доверия. Нет доверия между глобальными финансовыми институтами, национальными государствами, между субъектами финансового сектора, реальной экономики, между странами и так далее. Я убежден, что без всеобщего доверия любой антикризисный план лишь сведется к практике очередного латания дыр. В 21 веке миру нужна новая экономическая модель. Она должна базироваться прежде всего на честной, справедливой мировой финансовой системе, где не будет обмана, безответственности и расточительности, где блага, производимые человечеством, будут направляться на созидание и прогресс во имя счастья и развития каждого общества. Четвертый урок заключается в стремлении к чувству меры. Во-первых, финансовый сектор не может и не должен развиваться в отрыве от реального производства и на глобальном, и на национальном уровне. Предкризисная ситуация, когда оборот деривативов в 8 раз превышал суммарный ВВП всей планеты, самоубийственна для глобальной экономики. Поэтому особый акцент в реформировании глобального финансового управления надо сделать на создание эффективной модели регулирования рынка производных ценных бумаг. Во-вторых, важно решить вопрос о глобальном контроле за офшорами. Объемы средств, выведенных в офшорные зоны из национальных экономик, насчитывают до 0,3 триллионов долларов. По сути, они становятся минами замедленного действия, которые могут детонировать любую минуту. И ситуация вокруг Кипра – настойчивое предупреждение об этой проблеме. Пятый урок связан с тем, что текущий глобальный кризис многомерен. Я не случайно назвал его первым всеобщим кризисом глобализированного мира. Его ход и динамику определяют не только экономические, но и политические, гуманитарные, нравственно-ценностные причины. Сегодня, например, нельзя не видеть проблемы, связанные с расширением числа стран, ставших хроническими реципиентами международной помощи. Внутренние конфликты в Ближнем Востоке и Северной Африке покажутся тяжелым грузом на мировую экономику. Если посмотреть внимательно, то что произошло в Северной Африке и в других странах, показало, что отдельные государства, которые были донором мировой экономики, сами стали сегодня реципиентами. Вот к чему привело эти волнения. Но мировой экономический пожар невозможно остановить всемирным потопом политической дестабилизации. Новая глобальная экономика немыслима без нового справедливого миропорядка. Учет этих 5 уроков, осмысленных в ходе глобального кризиса, подчеркиваю, принципиально важен для определения верного антикризисного тренда развития мира в текущем столетии. Отрадно, что сегодня возросла роль Организации Объединенных Наций в поиске глобальных антикризисных решений. Вы видите, какая представительная делегация Организации Объединенных Наций сегодня присутствует на нашем форуме. Это тоже важное обращение внимания на эту проблему. В сентябре 2011 года, выступая на 66-й сессии Генассамблеи ООН, я призвал мировое сообщество безотлагательно начать работу над пактом глобального регулирования. Этот документ может стать реальным инструментом для согласования ключевых аспектов международной экономической политики. К ним относятся разработка механизма функционирования новой глобальной финансовой системы, создание мирового регулятора, определяющего единые правила игры. Сегодня также жизненно важно расширить диалог по глобальному антикризисному менеджменту в рамках G8 и G20. Казахстан, как приглашенная страна предстоящего Санкт-Петербургского саммита Большой Двадцатки, доведет до его участников предложения и рекомендации Астанинского форума и Всемирной антикризисной конференции. Дорогие друзья, если на будущее смотреть только с тревогой, то и будущее будет с тревогой смотреть на нас. Любой кризис – это прежде всего возможность кардинальных изменений в будущем. Год назад с трибуны этого форума я предложил идею G-Global. Я благодарен всем, кто положительно ее оценил. Главный смысл G-Global заключается в том, чтобы предложить позитивную альтернативную хаотической динамике смены глобальных парадигм мирового развития. Не только страны в группе G8, G20, но и все страны, несмотря они великие, малые или средние, могут внести свой вклад в всеобщую выработку предложения нового миропорядка в 21 веке, и это делает G-Global. Она основана на объединяющем потенциале 5 простых, ясных принципов, о которых я говорил. Хочу напомнить о них. Во-первых, эволюция и отказ от революционных изменений в политике. Мы из истории очень хорошо знаем, к чему это приводило. Во-вторых, справедливость, равенство, консенсус. В-третьих, глобальная толерантность и доверие. В-четвертых, глобальная транспарентность. В-пятых, конструктивная многополярность. На их основе в 21 веке возможен, на мой взгляд, успешный диалог по любой глобальной проблеме, выход на приемлемые для всех участников решения. Сегодня миру нужны новая глобальная финансово-экономическая система, эффективные глобальные структуры безопасности, в том числе ядерная. Сегодняшняя финансово-экономическая система состоялась, Бреттон-Вудская называется, которому в следующем году исполняется 70 лет. Огромный потенциал имеет продолжение глобального диалога, ведущего к укреплению толерантности и согласия. В условиях глобальной трансформации, как никогда прежде, нужна политическая воля, решительность, согласованность, открытость и доверие. Я искренне надеюсь, что число последователей G-Global будет расти. Для дальнейшего развития этой идеи я предлагаю создать, по примеру Римского и Мадридского клубов, попечительский совет G-Global. В его рамках надо осуществлять финансирование исследований фундаментальных аспектов идеи. Дамы и господа, Казахстан появился на политической карте мира всего немногим 2 десятилетия назад. Мы начинали с нуля. Сегодня успехи нашей экономики признаны всеми. В 2012 году в рейтинге ведения бизнеса Всемирным банком наша страна отмечена 49-м местом. По показателю защиты инвесторов 10-е место. В рейтинге конкурентоспособности, определяемом Всемирным экономическим форумом, Казахстан занял уже 51-е место. Мы вплотную подошли к решению задачи, поставленной несколько лет назад, войти в число 50 самых конкурентоспособных стран мира. Как вы знаете, мы разработали новый политический курс «Стратегия Казахстана до 2050 года». Ее главная цель – превратить Казахстан в одну из 30 самых развитых стран, прогрессирующих на основе инновационных экономических и социальных принципов. Самое важное из них – гармоничное развитие триады – экономика, энергетика, экология. И это не заоблачная утопия, а реальная потребность всего человечества. Грядущий выход мировой экономики из кризиса неминуемо приведет к более масштабному росту производства и потребления. К тому же реальность такова, что в современном мире каждый 5-й человек вообще не имеет доступа к электроэнергии. Поэтому становится неоправданной беспечностью отодвигать решение энергоэкологических проблем на поздние сроки. В прошлом году на саммите Рио-де-Жанейро +20 наши инициативы о глобальной энергоэкологической стратегии и программе «Зеленый мост» получили поддержку мирового сообщества. Переход к зеленой энергетике, внедрение зеленых технологий, Это растущий вектор глобальной экономики. Казахстан, несмотря на наличие в наших недрах огромных природных богатств, включая углеводороды, намерен активно развивать возобновляемые источники энергии. В нашей стратегии 2050 такие задачи поставлены. Мы намерены ежегодно инвестировать в зеленую модернизацию средств в объеме 2% национального ВВП. Все это отражено в принятой нами концепции перехода к зеленой экономике. Через 4 года в Астане пройдет Всемирная выставка Экспо-2017. Не случайно мы предложили провести ее под девизом «Энергия будущего». Я приглашаю в деловые круги всех частей света принять самое активное участие в подготовительной работе проведения Экспо-2017. Дорогие друзья, 21 век набирает свой ход, сжимая время и расстояние. Рождается новый тип глобальной экономики, утверждаются новые принципы международных отношений, новые ценности общественной жизни. Поэтому сегодня важно найти верные решения глобальных проблем. Я искренне желаю участникам форума, делегатам Всемирной антикризисной конференции успехов в проведении плодотворных дискуссий, выработки новых рекомендаций. Благодарю вас за внимание.
Mr. President, thank you for your engaging and thought-provoking speech. You have raised a lot of issues that will be debated here in Astana this week. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the President of the United Nations General Assembly, Mr. Vuk Jeremic.
Esteemed President Nazarbayev, Mr. UN Under-Secretary General, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly humbled by the invitation to address the 6th Astana Economic Forum and the World Anti-Crisis Conference, generously hosted by the Eurasian Economic Club of Scientists and the Republic of Kazakhstan. At the very onset of my remarks, allow me to wholeheartedly thank President Nazarbayev and his government for the exceptionally warm hospitality accorded to me and my delegation. For me, it is a real pleasure to be back in what UNESCO called the City of Peace. I was privileged to visit this place many times in my previous capacity as Serbia's foreign minister. And on each occasion, I've been truly struck by how fast it continues to grow. Anchored by the Bayterak and Kazakh Ili monuments, both associated with the legendary Sumruk bird, the city is blossomed by the banks of the river Ishim, when Khan Shatir and the Pyramid of Peace and Reconciliation monuments standing out in their uniqueness amongst many symbols of an ambitious and confident capital. Today's Astana is the quintessence of progress Kazakhstan has achieved as a nation, celebrating its own culture and traditions while embracing innovation as a catalyst for consolidating the gains of independence. The present generation has revived the legacy of the Batirs, and in the last 2 decades, crafted a modern sovereign state with no outstanding issues with any of its neighbors. Home to a proud and valiant people, this beautiful country of open steppes and snow-capped mountains stands at the crossroad of the world's most important civilizations. Populated by more than 140 ethnic and 17 religious groups living together in harmony, Kazakhstan is a regional pillar of stability and progress. It has prioritized education of its youth and created a strong social and healthcare safety nets. This nation athletes have triumphed in successive Olympic Games, and its scientists have helped achieve significant breakthroughs in a number of areas. The economy is developing rapidly, in no small measure due to the wise and responsible use of the riches gained from abundant hydrocarbon resources. This has facilitated growth in other areas, such as agriculture. And it has also enabled funding for strategic infrastructure projects, including the construction of a Western Europe, Western China energy and transportation corridor. The ancient Silk Road that served as the main trade route across the Eurasian landmass for centuries will soon be reborn. As a result, Kazakhstan will integrate even more fully into the global society, serving as a critical bridge between East and the West. Achievements at home have helped the country become an active player on the international scene. In an unprecedented demonstration of leadership, it voluntarily renounced the world's fourth largest nuclear arsenal, and today stands at the vanguard of efforts to promote nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Kazakhstan also became the first post-Soviet state to preside over the OSCE and the OIC. It has emerged as a champion of interfaith dialogue while making tangible contributions to fighting international terrorism and organized crime. Its largest city of Al-Madani is naturally positioned to grow in significance as a center for UN activities in this part of the world. Excellencies, as indicated in the draft Astana Anti-Crisis Declaration, the intent of this conference is to provide additional tools for all nations to better cope and respond to the financial tumults of the future. I look forward to fruitful discussions clustered around the threefold aims. The first is to promote balanced, sustained, and inclusive growth through fostering a more attractive business environment. Secondly, to seek out ways to increase stability of financial systems, as well as minimize vulnerabilities to external shocks and internal credit bubbles. And thirdly, to encourage the establishment of a more integrated, transparent, predictable, and responsible regulatory framework, including the more stringent oversight mechanisms and risk management practices. Excellencies, I believe it is fitting that such a gathering be held in a nation which has articulated a clear and determined vision for its future on the basis of the groundbreaking document, Strategy Kazakhstan 2050, New Political Course for an Established State. One of its objectives is to enhance the capacity of the G Global communication platform. Since its very launch, this innovative social network has brought together Kazakh intellectuals with their counterparts from all over the world. Participants have engaged in open and substantial debates on a wide range of development-related topics, leading to the publication of a number of insightful reports. They contain practical proposals on how to overcome contemporary challenges in fields such as financial regulation, debt restructuring, public administration modernization, energy, water, and access, to name just a few. The G Global Initiative seeks to empower individuals to participate in discussions on how to achieve what a recent United Nations Secretary General report defined as a more participatory system of global governance. Such reasoning has influenced my choice as President of the General Assembly for the thematic debates taking place during the current 67th session of the body that I preside. One of them was held on April 15 and examined the issue of the UN and global economic governance. It focused on how significant economic actors, including international financial institutions, as well as informal groupings such as the G20, may interact with the rest of the world in the future. One of the conclusions of the event in the General Assembly was that the GA can provide a unique platform for all developed and developing countries to exchange views and share information on common economic concerns. I am pleased to announce that another important thematic debate will be convened on September 10 of this year in the UN. And I will use this opportunity and this platform to publicize it for the first time. It will focus on the role of credit rating agencies in the international financial system. It is in the view of their critical and often criticized position in issues related to evaluating risk and external debt sustainability. I believe that the holding of this thematic debate in the heart of the United Nations system and open to the world will help advance the overall aims of the anti-crisis conference. Excellencies, our increasingly globalized and interdependent world is beset by one of the most profound, all-encompassing periods of transformation ever to occur in peacetime. We are in the midst of an unprecedented pivot towards a more democratized system of international relations, in which nations aspire to greater empowerment and freedom of action. This will surely lead to a grand reorganization of human affairs. It is against such backdrop that world leaders came together last June in Rio de Janeiro to adopt the historic Future We Want document, which set the core principles for the post-2015 agenda. For the first time ever, UN member states agreed to comprehensively integrate the three dimensions of sustainable development, namely economic, social, and environmental, into a single, fully coherent whole. In Rio de Janeiro, the General Assembly of the United Nations received additional mandates. In essence, it was given the strategic task of crafting a new, ambitious, universal framework that will define much of the UN's work for decades to come. According to the terms set in Rio, the General Assembly has only around 1,000 days to carry out these assignments. They include conceiving and adopting the Sustainable Development Goals, creating a workable arrangement for monitoring their implementation, and establishing an intergovernmental process to propose options for an effective sustainable development financing strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, the last one is perhaps the most complex and sensitive of the work streams to emerge from the Rio +20 conference. From my view, the post-2015 agenda will only become a reality once the world agrees on mechanisms to fund for its enactment. I appointed a highly competent diplomat, Ambassador Birganim Aitimova, permanent representative of Kazakhstan to the United Nations, as one of the two co-facilitators for achieving this critical objective. I place great confidence in this country's capacity to serve as an honest broker between East and the West, North and the South. I hope that the outcomes of the Astana Anti-Crisis Conference can provide practical inputs for the intergovernmental process, as well as the other work streams of the post-2015 agenda. Excellencies, before coming to the end of my remarks, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate President Nazarbayev for committing Kazakhstan to become the first post-Soviet state to start a transition to a green economy, despite its gigantic hydrocarbon reserves. This will surely place the country at the vanguard of the global paradigm shift towards sustainable development. The Rio +20 concluding document has already singled out Kazakhstan's role in advancing the post-2015 agenda, having welcomed the Green Bridge Partnership Program. This practical mechanism, conceived by this country to encompass all Central Asian nations, is being open to every UN member state. It aims to promote cutting-edge technology transfers and environmental management best practices. It also seeks to improve legal, economic, and institutional conditions to encourage a new wave of green industries across the world. I'm confident that the results of these initiatives will feature prominently in Astana's Expo 2017, whose theme is Future Energy Action for Global Sustainability. Excellencies, I expect that the Anti-Crisis Conference will play a significant role in charting a course towards a more balanced world economic and financial systems. I look forward to your deliberations and hope they will draw upon the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, which states that the United Nations should employ international machinery for the promotion of the economic and social advancement for all. In a landmark address, President Nazarbayev called on his people to embrace the opportunities of the post-2015 agenda by arming themselves with eternal qualities, diligence, industry, and purposefulness, enabling them to stand firm and provide a homeland with a deserved future. As the driving force behind the remarkable transformation of Kazakhstan over the past 2 decades, his vision commands profound respect. Let us join together in common purpose to bequeath to the coming generations a world that is safer, more peaceful, and economically better off than the one we inherited from our predecessors. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jermic. And now I invite the Prime Minister of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia to take the floor, Mr. Nikola Gruevski.
Distinguished President Nazarbayev, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great honor and pleasure to address this outstanding audience at the Astana Economic Forum. Please accept my congratulations on organizing such a spectacular event, which marks the rapidly growing economic power of Kazakhstan on the global scene. The Astana Economic Forum comes at times of renewed enthusiasm about the prospects of the world economy. The global financial system is much more stable now than it was 7 months ago. The United States economy remains resilient and is gathering strength, and in the meantime, acute short-term stability risks in the euro area have been reduced. Asia leads the global recovery, driving an astonishing 2/3 of total growth in the 5 years since the crisis hit. Other fast-growing emerging economies, such as Kazakhstan, also provide evidence that new chapters of prosperity and opportunity seem to unfold in the near future. Despite the economic recovery, challenges remain, especially for the stability of the global financial system. Bank balance sheets repair has not been completed, and progress has been uneven across different continents. Liquidity is not adequately flowing in the euro area periphery. And some emerging markets have become very sensitive to volatile capital flows and global interest rates. Moreover, the insufficient progress in implementing the global financial reform agenda creates a climate of prolonged regulatory uncertainty. Due to the time constraints, I will refer only to several pressing issues for the global financial stability. The recent global crisis has shown that in the absence of appropriate government regulations, privately profitable action leads to systematic risk. Even without deep financial market linkages, there are strong interdependencies through which a shock can become symmetric. From one part of the system, it can be easily transmitted to others. Credit rating agencies have also come under increased scrutiny during the global economy meltdown because of their failure to recognize the threats to the global financial system prior to the crisis. The public policy debates have detected many problems, such as conflicts of interest, transparency issues, rating competency, and concentration in the credit rating industry. But the solutions are far from easy. The United States and the European Union have recently enhanced the regulatory power in this area. In order to strengthen the global financial architecture, those are necessary steps, but maybe not sufficient. There is mounting evidence that competition in the international banking sector must be enhanced and healthier. The big banks are defined nowadays as systematically important financial institutions. As such, they are practically too big to fail. Our international institutions must make the utmost efforts to increase effective supervision, reduce systematic and liquidity risk, and create a more stable global financial system. Within the European Union, a stronger financial oversight framework is needed to restore investor confidence and improve market discipline. The proposals to harmonize capital requirements and to move closer to a banking union also need to be carefully examined. From a national perspective, expertly staffed and independent institutions must also evaluate financial regulation from the public interest perspective. This appears to be a critically important reform of the governance of financial regulations. Easier said than done, each country must shoulder its share of the burden of adjustment and contribute to a more stable global financial system. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me now reflect on the experience of the Republic of Macedonia. Republic of Macedonia has several advantages which are very attractive for the investors and which helped a lot to us during the period of the global economic crisis and the European debt crisis. First of all, Macedonia has very stable macroeconomy policy with a low state debt, 33% of GDP, which is the fifth lowest debt in Europe at the moment. We have low inflation, about 2 to 3% in the last 15 years, and stable currency fixed to the euro. The banking sector is very stable. Second, Macedonia is a country with the lowest costs for doing business in Europe, including the lowest taxes in Europe. For example, the profit tax is 10%, but just for the companies which are distributing the profit to dividends. The companies which are not distributing the profit to dividends are paying nothing, 0% profit tax. It is enough either to keep the money in the company, to increase the capitalization of the company, or to reinvest the profit, and you don't need to pay profit tax, unlimited amounts and unlimited years. The personal income tax is 10%. We have implemented flat rate taxes. The monthly growth salaries are very competitive, about $600 US. The other costs for doing business are also lowest in Europe. We have so-called technological industrial development zones, where there is a 10 years tax holiday for the companies which are investing there. For 10 years, they are not paying personal and profit tax at all, and they are not paying custom duties and VAT for the raw materials imported for producing of goods for the export. Additionally, the land is given on the concession base up to 99 years under the symbolic price, and the government is co-financing the construction of facilities and training of the workers up to €500,000. The third important thing that helps us in this period is that the country has free trade agreements with all countries in Europe, in the continent Europe. That means European Union, non-EU countries, including Turkey, Ukraine, Switzerland, Norway, minus Russia. Everything which is produced in Macedonia is exported in 660 million market of the continent Europe without paying a custom duties. The fourth is that Macedonia has very good business climate. The World Bank, for example, ranked Macedonia on the 23rd position in the world in their annual edition doing business, in front of 20 of total number 27 countries, members of European Union. And in the last 6 years, Macedonia is always between 3 or 4 best reformers in the world every year, according to the World Bank Doing Business report. Having in mind that the country has official status of country candidate for full membership to European Union and full membership to NATO, and a clear European perspective, and government which is friendly to the business, that help even during the crisis to come to attract many global companies and to construct new facilities, and they choose Macedonia as a gateway to the European markets. Additional reforms and anti-crisis steps were taken during the crisis. As opposed of the control on flows of hot money, we are very much open to foreign direct investments. The US-based Johnson Controls and US-based Kemet Electronics, the Russian pharmaceutical brand Prote Group, the German corporation Crombet and Schubert, and Draxler-Meyer, the Swiss Wine-Teach International, Technohose from Italy, Van Hoo from Belgium, Johnson Matthey from United Kingdom, and many others from different sides of the world already invested in the past few years in Macedonia. As already noted, attracting financial capital is impossible without having a competitive human capital in place. We broadened the access to the tertiary education, particularly in the mathematics, sciences, and information technology, and significantly increased the computer and internet use in the public schools and universities. Actually, all children in primary and secondary schools in Macedonia have computers and internet in front of themselves. And they have also mandatory learning English language from the first class elementary school to the end of the secondary school. Also, the government translated more than 1,000 books which are used to the top 10 universities in the world and gave to the universities in Macedonia to use them in educational process. We invested a lot in new universities, new faculties, new laboratories, and many other investments in education. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, given the abrupt and brought about by the crisis on the growth experience of emerging Europe, it is fair to ask if development through financial integration was worth the risks. On the whole, I strongly believe the answer is on the positive. In fact, even after accounting for the sharp declines in real GDP of the past 2 years, most countries managed to make significant progress in their convergence aspirations. Of course, there is also much to learn, and avoiding the worst of the excesses brought about the external financing is warranted. Moreover, it is also true that some countries managed to converge while building fewer sources of vulnerability. Going forward, the challenge is to keep a balance between growth and vulnerability choices while recognizing that the European integration has numerous advantages. In sum, the strategy for emerging Europe is to make the most of the opportunities ahead while minimizing the risks inherent in excessively leveraged balance sheets. Thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. And now, dear participants, please welcome the United Nations Under-Secretary for Economic and Social Affairs, Mr. Woo Hong-bo, who will deliver a message on behalf of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Sir, the floor is yours.
Your Excellency, Mr. Yusutan Nazarbayev, President of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Your Excellency, Mr. Vuk Yemerich, President of the General Assembly, and Your Excellency, Mr. Zesatol Ossoril, President of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. Ministers, distinguished representatives, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor and the pleasure to deliver the message of Secretary General to the 6th Astana Economic Forum and the World Anti-Crisis Conference. And I quote, I am pleased to send greetings to the 6th Astana Economic Forum and the World Anti-Crisis Conference. In bridging together global business leaders with the high-level representatives from governments, academia, media, and culture, this forum is an important platform to forge a common policy agenda for inclusive and equitable growth. You meet at a time of a continued global economic uncertainty, widespread unemployment, growing inequalities, banking fragility, and sovereign debt problems threaten the modest global economic recovery. Recent experience underscores the continuing need for coordinated action to reduce international financial market volatility and the risk of a future crisis. We must make renewed efforts to sustain economic recovery and generate decent jobs, especially for women and youth. Global economic governance structures should also better reflect the voices of developing countries in the world economy. We are less than 1,000 days to the deadline for the largest and the most successful anti-poverty push in history, the Millennium Development Goals. Now is the time to build on progress and accelerate our efforts to reach all the MDG targets. At the same time, the United Nations is supporting member states in their work to define a post-2015 development agenda and a new set of goals for sustainable development. Defining and implementing such a framework will require your active engagement. I encourage you to use this forum as an opportunity to help us build the world we want. I wish you a productive meeting. This concludes the message of the Secretary General. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to address you today also in my own capacity as the Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs. I join Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in congratulating the government of Kazakhstan for convening this conference and for bringing together government leaders and world-renowned experts. We are deeply appreciative of the warm hospitality extended to all the participants. The agenda of the 6th Astana Economic Forum and the World Anti-Crisis Conference highlights the crucial issues facing the world today, nearly 5 years after the global financial crisis. I will speak on 3 broad issues: the world economic situation and the prospects, the policy challenges, and the need to strengthen global economic governance. First, a few words about the world economic situation and the prospects. Most recently, we have seen measurable improvement in the world economy. The risk of Eurozone breakup has declined considerably. The United States economy has largely averted the fiscal cliff, and a significant slowdown in some of the large emerging countries' economies in 2012 has been avoided. Stock markets have also gained noticeably, and the bond spreads lowered markedly for some Euro members. However, real economic activity worldwide remains subdued. According to the latest UN forecast, the world economy will grow in 2013 at 2.3%, the same sluggish pace as it did in 2012. A mild pickup in global activity is only expected later this year and into 2014. In almost all regions, growth will remain well below potential. Employment gains will be weak. Among developed countries, the situation in the Euro area remains precarious. A number of Euro members are falling into a double-deep recession. No growth is expected for this region in 2013. While the United States economy is doing better than Europe, its prospects are still subject to uncertainties associated with its fiscal policy. Growth prospects for developing countries and economies in transition are notably stronger. However, potential growth is probably lower than before the global financial crisis. Some of these economies also face structural change challenges. Overall, risks for global economy remain, despite the recent progress in some areas. the possibility of a further deterioration in the euro area is still a major risk factor. Fiscal policy in the United States remains uncertain. There also remains a risk of a further slowdown in some of the large developing countries. Combined, these risks have the potential, once again, to derail the global recovery. Excellencies, let me now turn to policy challenge. The main objective for current macroeconomic policies is to support a robust global recovery with a focus on promoting job creation. The policy mix in individual countries, however, should be based on national circumstances. We should refrain from one-size-fits-all recommendations. In the area of fiscal policy, the effects of a fiscal tightening on output and employment in the current economic environment are much larger than originally estimated. This is particularly noted when countries tighten their fiscal policies simultaneously. Therefore, for countries facing low financing costs and high unemployment, it would be desirable to consider fiscal tightening and the methods to boost the economy in a holistic way. At the same time, policymakers should lay out a credible plan for fiscal sustainability. Countries in debt crisis or facing high financing costs may have to front-load fiscal consolidation. However, they should maintain adequate social protection for the most vulnerable groups while making necessary structural reforms. More importantly, we need to enhance international policy coordination in a number of fronts. We need to mitigate the spillover effect of the monetary policies in developed countries on other economies. These may include increased volatility in capital inflows and international commodity prices and the appreciation pressures on currencies. We must ensure that sufficient resources are made available to developing countries, especially the least developed countries, to accelerate their progress on the Millennium Development Goals. Ladies and gentlemen, I come to my third and the final point. The need for concerted actions to strengthen global economic governance. The world economy has undergone significant challenges and changes during the last few decades. Going forward, strengthening the voices and the participations of developing countries in multilateral frameworks and norm setting must remain a priority of the global economic governance reform agenda. The movement of IMF and the World Bank towards more representative governance structures is welcome, but more remains to be done. The process of ratification of the 2010 IMF quota and the governance reforms must be fully completed. The G20 is a welcome improvement over early groupings, such as the G7. However, it is important for the G20 to continue to strengthen its engagement with the United Nations and relevant stakeholders. The recent debate in the United Nations on global economic governance showed broad consensus on the importance of strengthening the relationship between G20 and the United Nations, as well as a greater G20 outreach. An effective system of global economic governance would enhance the global partnership for development and ensure the participation of relevant actors in international policy making and dialogue. Effective global economic governance is critical to achieving the MDGs by 2015. It is also needed for an inclusive development agenda beyond 2015. With the Sustainable Development Goals at its core, I am confident that the discussions here will help to find common ground and the policy solutions so that meaningful system reforms can be undertaken. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's now the turn of the President of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. Please welcome Nestor Osorio.
Your Excellency, Mr. President Nursultan Nazarbayev, President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Mr. Vuk Jeremik, President of the United Nations General Assembly, Mr. Wu Hongo, Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to be here today, and I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the organizers of this conference for inviting me in my capacity of President of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations to participate in this debate. We are here to address the problems of the global financial system and the global governance, and to find ways and proposals for the necessary corrections. It is very well timed that it is the public sector and the private sector, the business community, that get together in a forum like this to work on what we need to do for the future, to work on a partnership, not just as isolated sectors that do not work together. The World Anti-Crisis Conference takes place at a time when the global economy is still struggling for recovery, 5 years after the eruption of the crisis. Weakness in the major developed economies remain as one of the principal causes of the global slowdown. While developing countries have grown at a faster rate, some of them experience spillovers from the economic weakness in developed countries and structural problems in their domestic economies. The world financial and economic crisis has also shown a range of challenges, including those pertaining to unemployment, inequality, and the importance of a stable international financial system. It has, furthermore, been accompanied by additional crises relating to climate change, food, and energy security. Those are important challenges for the future. These pressing challenges and trends require forceful and concerted policy actions at both national and international levels to mitigate major risks and ensure a stronger and sustained economic recovery. Also, in the context of the post-2015 development agenda, there is a need for a renewed global partnership for development, which should be fostered by an effective strategy of financing for sustainable development. This fits very well as a clear component of your initiative, Mr. President, of G Global. The Millennium Development Goal strategy has had important achievements representing a global commitment to poverty reduction and development that should continue after 2015. However, there is a need for a more structural, inclusive, and systemic approach that can deliver on the transformative change needed to address current and emerging challenges and suggest credible strategies towards a secure, sustainable, and inclusive pathway for global development. This agenda should put in place a development strategy capable of promoting an inclusive growth with job creation while guaranteeing environmental sustainability. This is exactly what the Economic and Social Council, the ECOSOC, must achieve through a balanced integration of the three dimensions of the sustainable development: the economic, the social, and the environmental, in order to make the mandate established in the outcome document of Rio +20 a reality. That document, as the Undersecretary General has mentioned, is called The Future We Want. The major lesson from the global financial and economic crisis is very clear, and President Nazarbayev has very clearly pointed out that the existing structures of global economic governance are not functioning adequately and could not prevent another major crisis. Major failures of regulation and supervision and excessive risk-taking by banks and other financial institutions had created dangerous financial fragilities which contributed significantly to the current crisis. There is a clear need for greater transparency and better regulation and supervision of the international financial system by strengthening prudential oversight, improving risk management, and reinforcement international cooperation in this regard. The international financial and monetary system requires substantive reforms to reflect the new realities and the role of emerging economies in the global economic arena. A more participatory system of global economic governance requires further broadening and strengthening of the involvement of developing countries in international economic decision-making and norm-setting. An effective system of global economic governance also requires the active participation of civil society and the private sector in dialogue and activities related to sustainable development. To this end, the international community needs a strengthened system of global economic governance which goes beyond crisis prevention and management and seeks for a more accountable, more inclusive, and transparent global governance framework. The United Nations has a central role in the global economic governance to gather both the necessary political will and policy coordination at the international level as a truly universal multilateral forum with unquestioned legitimacy. Strengthening the role and effectiveness of the United Nations will be an important contribution towards a more coherent and coordinated framework for consistent and effective policymaking. At the core of the debate in this conference is the urgent need for a more decisive and effective action by the international community to mitigate major risks and ensure a stronger and sustained economic recovery. This is the task that we have to be devoted to during these days and the days to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Osorio. And now I invite Viktor Kristenko to take the floor, the chairman of the board of the Eurasian Economic Commission.
Уважаемые коллеги, в первую очередь я хотел бы поблагодарить Нурсултана Абишевича, организаторов форума, за возможность быть здесь сегодня и участвовать в этом важнейшем мероприятии. Ход развития интеграции в рамках Таможенного союза, единого экономического пространства Беларуси, Казахстана и России в последнее время активно обсуждается политиками, представителями деловых кругов и экспертным сообществом не только стран тройки, но и в наших зарубежных партнеров, в том числе на ключевых международных площадках. И это вполне объяснимо. В последние десятилетия важнейшие изменения в мире определялись двумя процессами – глобализацией и регионализацией. Где-то они шли параллельно, дополняя друг друга, где-то входили в столкновения. Однако глобальный финансовый кризис 2008 года внес свои коррективы в эту ситуацию. Кризис стал, по сути, катализатором для процессов интеграции и регионализации повсюду в мире. Не стал исключением и евразийский проект. Последние 3 года стали периодом перехода в новое качество. Это означало и запуск функционирования Таможенного союза, и начало формирования единого экономического пространства. Снятие барьеров и ограничений, формирование единого рынка – единственный драйвер, способный вдохнуть новые силы в экономике наших стран. В будущем году евразийскому проекту исполнится 20 лет. Именно тогда, 20 лет назад, в Москве с идеей этого проекта выступил уважаемый Нурсултан Абишевич Назарбаев, и очень хотелось бы достойно отметить эту дату созданием полноценно действующего Евразийского экономического союза. Сегодня для нас ключевой задачей является углубление интеграции. Мы стремимся не повторить ошибок наших коллег из других интеграционных объединений, когда широта была поставлена во главу угла в ущерб глубине, что, с моей точки зрения, и приводит к серьезным проблемам, особенно в бурные кризисные времена. Евразийский экономический проект – это стратегический, долгосрочный проект. Ожидать моментальных эффектов в проекте такого рода – это значит питать иллюзии. Ведь мы 3 страны, помимо прочего, находимся не в вакууме. И тогда, и когда у наших ключевых партнеров, например, у Евросоюза, на дворе кризис, рецессия и падение спроса, мы не можем и не сможем остаться незатронутыми негативными явлениями. Мы давно и плотно интегрированы в глобальную экономику. Это объективный контекст, и его нельзя не учитывать. Тем не менее, я приведу несколько доводов, на мой взгляд, явно свидетельствующих, что интеграция приносит конкретные результаты. Нас иногда упрекают, что в 2012 году, в первый год работы единого экономического пространства, темп увеличения взаимной торговли составил достаточно скромную величину – 8,7%. По нашему мнению, это очень неплохие результаты. Хотя в 2010-2011 годах прирост взаимной торговли был порядка 30%, около 30% в год. Но эти темпы были существенно ниже роста торговли с третьими странами. А в 2012 году, в очень сложном экономическом году, темп прироста нашей взаимной торговли в 3 раза выше, чем внешний. Еще более важно, что взаимная торговля растет за счет товаров обрабатывающей промышленности. В 2010 году на долю взаимной торговли приходилось около 9,7% нашего экспорта, а в 2012 эта цифра выросла уже до 10,3%. Но если взять этот экспорт без учета минерально-сырьевых ресурсов, то в 2010 году на долю тройки в общем объеме экспорта приходилось 18%, а в 2012 уже почти 24%. То есть за 3 года мы имеем четкую позитивную тенденцию. Наша взаимная торговля растет, и растет за счет торговли несырьевыми товарами. И это все в условиях существенной либерализации доступа на созданный единый рынок. Во всех наших странах диверсификация экономики является ключевой стратегической задачей. И с учетом вышесказанного, функционирование таможенного союза, разворачивание единого экономического пространства и движение в сторону Евразийского экономического союза – это действенный инструмент диверсификации экономик наших стран. Задачи, которые ставят перед нами лидеры наших стран, весьма амбициозны. Нам необходимо двигаться по пути реализации 4 свобод. Свободу движения товаров, услуг, капитала и рабочей силы. Устранять пока еще существующие изъятия по товарным рынкам, достраивать единые правила и процедуры, формировать поле согласованных политик 3 стран. Хочу подчеркнуть, что все это делается на основе лучших национальных и мировых практик, двигая экономики наших стран вперед. Россия вошла в ВТО. При этом существенная часть обязательств России имплементирована в наднациональные нормы уже непосредственно Евразийской комиссии. Таким образом, и де юре, и де факто единый рынок таможенного союза и единого экономического пространства функционирует на основе норм и правил ВТО, становясь еще более открытым и понятным для инвесторов. В наших странах идут дискуссии о том, что больше дает ВТО, плюсов или минусов, каковы риски и тому подобное. Конечно, это очень важно. Но самое важное – это чтобы наши страны могли полноценно участвовать в обновлении глобальных правил игры, в том числе и в ВТО. Сегодня говорят о второй волне глобального финансового кризиса. С моей точки зрения, правильнее говорить уже о кризисе глобализации. При этом я глубоко убежден, что будущий облик мира будет зависеть от эффективности глобального диалога именно интеграционных формирований, и в том числе от их внутренней эффективности. Здесь на форуме сегодня среди самых активных и заинтересованных участников очень крупная делегация Евразийской экономической комиссии. Члены коллегии, министры, эксперты комиссии задействованы во всех круглых столах, во всех экспертных сессиях. Мы рассматриваем для себя Астанинский экономический форум как органичный и важный элемент построения такого глобального экономического интеграционного диалога. И я хотел бы всем нам и форуму пожелать успехов. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much. And now we welcome the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Supachai Panich-Pakti.
President Nursultan Nazarbayev, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a great privilege for me to represent United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in addressing this World Anti-Crisis Conference. And I would like to congratulate President Nazarbayev and the government of Kazakhstan for this initiative and for their boundless hospitality. The first time that I had the good opportunity to meet with President Nazarbayev was several years ago, when the President showed very strong determination to drive forward Kazakhstan's accession to the World Trade Organization. After a number of years and painstaking negotiations, it is therefore a great delight to me to take note that Kazakhstan is now on the verge of exiting the World Trade Organization. UNCTAD has been proud to have had the opportunity to work in support of the process of negotiations for the entry of Kazakhstan into the World Trade Organization, and we are most willing and delighted to again offer our support for the so-called post-accession processes for Kazakhstan to be able to reap fullest possible benefits from being a member of this august World Trade Organization. Ladies and gentlemen, Almost 5 years have passed since the global financial crisis, and the world economy is still reeling from these consequences. Last year, global growth was only 2.3%, and a full recovery is not in sight. In fact, Undersecretary Wu from DESA has just mentioned that it is to be expected that the global growth this year will remain at best, again at the level of 2.3%, which is not an improvement from last year. The main reason for this is the continued stagnation in the developed economies, which is adversely affected economic dynamism in other regions throughout the world. Indeed, growth in the advanced economies is most likely to slow down from 1.2% from last year, 2012, to a mere 0.8% in 2013. And in spite of all the good news here and there, and I would say some early dawns, warnings, we are seeing the kind of continuation of anemic growth around the world. And if developed countries remain unable to revive their economies, there is a risk that this mediocre pace of growth may yet turn into another global recession. At this juncture, we therefore face a dual challenge. First, we must urgently take measures to restore the world economy to stable and sustained growth so as to truly overcome the crisis. Second, and perhaps even more importantly, we must ensure that such a devastating financial crisis cannot ever recur. This will require significant reforms to global economic governance far beyond what has been achieved so far. The slow growth in the advanced economies and thus in the world economy is partly the natural consequence of a credit crunch and sharply reduced demand in the aftermath of a crisis. However, in many countries, these effects are being exacerbated by severe austerity policies. In the immediate aftermath of the crisis, a number of countries implemented coordinated fiscal stimulus measures, which actually prevented the downturn from becoming a global economic meltdown. However, soon thereafter, the focus of policies in the major advanced economies shifted. Led by concerns over possible inflation and debt, countries withdrew fiscal stimuli and adopted austerity policies. The task of restarting growth was left to a combination of loose monetary policies and a set of structural reforms. And yet, so far, this approach has not been able to restore growth. Despite years of unprecedented monetary expansions in the United States, Europe, and more recently Japan, banking credit provided to the private sector has stagnated or even decreased. This is largely because banks cannot or will not lend, or because consumers and investors cannot or will not borrow. This conundrum reminds us of the adage that during economic depression, expansionary monetary policies are like pushing on a string, rather ineffective. The problem is not the supply of money. The problem is the aggregate demand. What is needed are measures to support demand. And yet, austerity policies are contracting demand by raising taxes and reducing expenditure just when such expenditure would be most required. In this way, several countries that have adopted austerity policies have now been pushed into a form of so-called double-dip recession. In addition, since these austerity programs hamper growth and consequently public revenues, they did not achieve the target of fiscal consolidation either. there has not been an achievement in the reduction of budget deficit or fiscal deficits. Recent IMF research has also corroborated the negative effects of government spending cuts and tax hikes in times of recession. It is therefore time to reassess the merits of the current policy approach, and I therefore greatly look forward to a lively debate on the best future course of action here. The second key challenge is to prevent a recurrence of the crisis. The financial meltdown at the heart of the financial system has reminded us of a lesson we should already have learned after the Asian financial crisis in the 1990s, namely that deregulated financial markets do not allocate resources efficiently and are prone to herd behavior and crisis. Nevertheless, after the initial flurry of measures to bail out banks and companies in need of liquidity, enthusiasm to address the wider systemic origins of the crisis quickly faded away. At the national level, there have been efforts to strengthen regulation of the financial sector in the United States, but at the global level, reforms have been limited to a slight revision of the Basel capital adequacy requirement, as well as a number of measures to address tax havens. It is not clear whether these measures could have prevented the financial crisis had they been in place in 2007. And yet, even these minor steps are beginning to be rolled back. More importantly, the reforms have not addressed the more fundamental problems of our global financial architecture. The current system, based on deregulated capital markets and floating exchange rates, has not prevented prolonged misalignments of exchange rates or the buildup of large current account imbalances. It has failed to avert the disorderly expansion of short-term capital movements, which have been a major factor of economic instability. In order to address these issues, much bolder reforms will be required. UNCTAD has long argued that international monetary and financial relations should be governed by rules similar to those currently governing the use of trade policies measures at the World Trade Organization. In a world where tariffs and international trade are increasingly governed by a set of rules to prevent the so-called beggar-thy-neighbor policies and foster trade liberalization, it is certainly incomprehensible that similar rules do not exist for the global financial system. And this is despite the fact that even small realignments of exchange rates can wipe out any gains from trade liberalization, or that exchange rate crises have repeatedly shown themselves to have devastating effects. A multilateral system of rules could ensure that exchange rates better reflect long-run fundamentals and credibly prevent the buildup of imbalances. Similarly, there is a need to rein in the large volumes of speculative capital flows. Such unregulated capital flows generate a risk not only in the recipient country, but also in the source economy, where the solvencies of banks may be undermined by their exposure to asset bubbles in foreign countries. Macroprudential supervision should therefore be applied at both ends of capital movements. These are only some of the ideas, many of which require more technical work and analysis. Yet it is clear that truly preventing future financial crises will require an overhaul of the current system tantamount to a new Bretton Woods. Any such system must, of course, give greater voice to developing nations than they have so far enjoyed in the international financial institutions. But sadly, we are still far from such reforms. But I'm confident that conferences like this one, benefiting from global participation and expert insight, can make such a start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And now I invite Ratu-Inoke to take the floor. He's the Foreign Minister of Fiji and chair of the G77 in China at the United Nations.
Your Excellency, Mr. Nursultan Nazarbayev, President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the 132 member countries of the Group of 77 and China. At the outset, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the government of Kazakhstan and the organizers of this conference for inviting me in my capacity as chair of the Group of 77 and China to participate in this high-level event. At a personal level, I wish to thank you, President Nazarbayev, and through you, the people of Kazakhstan, for the warm reception and hospitality extended to me and my delegation since our arrival in your beautiful city. Ladies and gentlemen, 5 years after the eruption of the global financial crisis, the world economy's growth prospect is still very fragile. It is of concern that the essential tools of fiscal stimulus are not being carried out in the developed countries to recover from the recession. Even though there is value in reinstalling prudent fiscal discipline, evidence indicates that austerity measures applied across affected countries have led to contracted economies, which dampen demand, employment, and other social indicators. This poses a grave threat to recovery as well as growth and long-term development. On the other hand, expansionary monetary policies and currency devaluations adopted by developed countries have also adversely impacted developing countries. While developing countries did not cause the latest financial crisis, they are nonetheless severely affected by its adverse consequences that threaten the economic and social progress achieved during recent years, leading to increased poverty and inequality. Because of the limited scope of their economies, many developing countries are unable to implement appropriate fiscal measures to mitigate the adverse impacts of the crisis, further hindering the capacity of developing countries to achieve many internationally agreed development goals, including the Millennium Development Goals. In the face of uneven and unpredictable forces, developing countries need to maintain their right to development through policy space and strategies based on their unique social, political, economic, and environmental conditions. The increasing interdependence of national economies in a globalizing world has accentuated once again the importance of strengthening the role of the United Nations in global economic governance. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations, particularly the General Assembly, provides a truly universal and inclusive multilateral forum for dialogue and norm setting, which is the basis of the legitimacy and confers incomparable value to its discussions, its negotiated agreements, and to the UN's operational activities. In this regard, the UN General Assembly and a strengthened Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, could both act in collaboration with the UN funds and programs and specialized agencies to assist national governments of developing countries to mitigate the impacts of the world financial crisis. It is encouraging to know that discussions on the role of the United Nations in global economic governance is currently taking place in New York, and the Group of 77 and China will be actively engaged in the negotiations for a resolution of the same subject in the General Assembly this year. The Group of 77 and China has repeatedly called for a viable model of international financial architecture, one that reflects the realities of the 21st century and gives developing countries an increased voice and representation in global economic governance. It is important that efforts to reform the international financial architecture be internationally coordinated and should ensure full participation of developing countries in international financial and economic decision-making. The Group of 77 and China reaffirms its support for a comprehensive reform of the Bretton Woods institutions, including the enhancement in the voting powers of developing countries in a time-bound manner, which would give greater equity between developed and developing countries. Ladies and gentlemen, within the international monetary system, the Group of 77 and China believes there are two key areas that require systematic reform. These are the reserve system and global imbalances. Mounting reserve accumulation in developing countries constitutes a perverse net flow of resources from developing countries to the developed countries. This practice is very costly, both in terms of global imbalance and in social costs on a national level. Instead of allowing these resources to sit dormant in low-yielding assets, primarily on US Treasury bills and bonds, which currently have record low interest rates, they could be used for productive investment and development financing in developing countries domestically. Policy actions are required to reduce the reserve needs of developing countries in order to address the insurance-based nature of the current reserve system. One of the most feasible ways is to move away from the current reserve system anchored to the US dollar to a reserve system based on the composite international currency, such as the special drawing right, SDR. SDRs are a valuable boost for developing countries because they can be converted into hard currency to be used as governments determine without conditions attached. The Group of 77 and China is of the view that SDRs should be allocated according to a needs-based formula, using objective criteria such as development indicators and relative poverty levels to allow the SDRs to distribute the benefits of reserve creation more broadly across the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, the international community must realize that no recovery can be achieved and no path to growth can be construed or fostered with unsustainable debt overhang. This message was stressed by the Prime Minister of Fiji as chair of G77 and China at the UN Debt Sustainability Conference in New York last month. Sovereign debt management has been a crucial issue for developing countries, both as a cause for concern in past decades and as a strong point in more recent years due to the activities of vulture funds. The Group of 77 and China believes that vulture funds must not be allowed to paralyze the debt restructuring efforts of developing countries, and that these funds should not supersede a state's right to protect its people under international law. When the market-based and ad hoc contractual approach to working out government debt is insufficient to deal with debt crisis, the preferred option should be a human rights approach. This approach calls for a fair, human-centered, and development-oriented mechanism to assist governments facing sovereign debt problems to fulfill their sovereign duty to respect their people's right to development. According to the Group of 77 in China, we would like to use this occasion to reiterate its support for the setting up of an independent international system of debt arbitration, in which countries facing risks of debt distress can have recourse to a debt standstill. Such a system would facilitate debt workouts with burden-sharing procedures. Ladies and gentlemen, at the national level, developing countries should review their development strategies to see if they are still appropriate or whether changes are needed to respond to the changed international situation. For developing countries, it is time to seriously consider alternative development strategies when the prevailing business-centered development model does not lead to sustainable and inclusive growth. We must reflect on the appropriateness of the prevailing development paradigm and consider suitable regulation to ensure that markets will complement efforts of states towards achieving inclusive, sustainable development. In this regard, government responses to the financial crisis must be people-centered and pay special attention to the needs and vulnerabilities of the weak and marginalized members of society. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to share with you that Fiji, as the chair of the Group of 77 in China, hosted a high-level panel of eminent personalities of the South on 7th to the 9th of May 2013. The objective of the three-day meeting was to map out the future landscape of South-South cooperation. The meeting acknowledged that South-South cooperation is playing an important role in helping many developing countries to address the multiple and complex development challenges. The meeting also emphasized that the common endeavor of the South should not be seen as a replacement of the North-South cooperation. At the global level, South-South cooperation requires adequate and structured financial and institutional support, including the political will of the developed countries to honor their overseas development assistance commitments. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Group of 77 in China, I wish the 6th Astana Economic Forum and World Anti-Crisis Conference a great success. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And now please welcome Ahmad-Mohamed-Ali Al-Madani, the President of the Islamic Development Bank.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellency, Mr. Nur Sultan Nazarbayev, President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Your Excellencies, the political leaders, heads of international organizations, distinguished business representatives, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On behalf of the Islamic Development Bank Group, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks and appreciation to the conference organizers for inviting me to deliver a statement on Islamic finance in this inaugural session of the 6th Astana Economic Forum. I would also like to congratulate the conference organizers for successfully organizing the 6th Astana Economic Forum, which, similar to the previous forums, will add to the knowledge of the participants and allow a healthy discussion on the global economic and financial developments, associated challenges, and the impact on financial stability. My remarks today will be on the potential role of Islamic finance in supporting the socio-economic development and providing stability. While speaking on the topic, I am aware of the fact the Central Asia region has historically played a very important role in inclusive and broad-based economic, financial, and intellectual development in our global village. The ancient Silk Route that passes through this region helped develop trade and commerce across continents in the past and facilitated information and knowledge sharing, thus bringing distant communities more closer. A number of scholars from this region have made a profound and lasting effects on the research methodology of knowledge. The fruits of those advancements were widely distributed throughout the world, and their contributions to knowledge are still relevant and resonate in our efforts towards economic development. Economic development, empowerment, governance, and preservation of human dignity are persistent challenges. They were important in the past as well, but their importance has increased more in the recent times. After the global financial crisis, the world is searching for a financial system that can tightly link finance with the real economic sector so that the finance would support economic growth without destabilizing effects of the financial crisis. Realization of this shared vision can be made possible by Islamic finance. It has features that will be helpful not only to secure this link, but also to make finance growth inclusive, broad-based, and productive for the social and economic development of the countries. In this short note, it will not be possible for me to go into details about all the features of Islamic finance and how it can help in realization of the shared vision. However, I just want to point out few attributes of Islamic finance and how it facilitates economic growth and stability. First, by linking with the real sector, Islamic finance puts emphasis on financing productive activities and avoiding socially undesired actions. The de-link between the real and financial sectors is avoided by prohibiting interest and the selling of debts and the rolling over of the unpaid debts, as well as prohibiting of the excess uncertainty in contracts, gharar, and by promoting ethical norms that ensure fairness and transparency. This also adds to the stability of both the financial sector and the real economy. Second, Islamic finance also fosters better financial inclusion by making finance compatible with the social values of solidarity as exemplified by the profit and loss sharing principle, which reduces reliance on collateral. By emphasizing real economic activity as basis for any gains, it develops healthy risk appetite at all levels of the society. This develops entrepreneurship and demand for real investments, which are key drivers for innovation, economic growth, and stability. Third, its abolition of interest would rationalize government borrowing and ensure best use of its internal and external resources in socially and economically useful projects, while freeing up resources for investment and economic growth through the private sector. The prohibition of interest also restricts unnecessary and excessive borrowing by the private sector. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, some of the main obstacles of the socio-economic development and growth of many developing countries are unsustainable public and private debt, lack of entrepreneurial activity, and suboptimal level of savings and investment. The three features of Islamic finance I mentioned earlier directly address those constraints contributing to put the countries on a path of fast-paced, exclusive economic growth. IDB member countries in the Central Asia region are poised for economic growth and development. I sincerely believe that Islamic finance can contribute to enhancing the general business environment and contribute to the promotion of trade, increase of foreign investment inflows, development of the domestic private sector, and economic growth. It is time that all stakeholders in the world economy, including the leading thinkers and policy makers, get actively involved in promotion of comprehensive socio-economic development and stability. In this endeavor, Islamic finance would be an important element that would contribute to inclusive, broad-based, equitable, and sustainable socio-economic development. On this note, I would like to wish all the conference participants successful deliberations over the next 2 days. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much. Now, last but not least, it's a great honor to welcome Robert Mundell, professor at Columbia University and Nobel laureate in economics 1999. Sir, the floor is yours.
Your Excellency, President Nazarbayev, other excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a great pleasure and honor for me to address you here. I want to share with the preceding speakers my congratulations to President Nazarbayev on the 6th Forum on the development, the new innovation this time of the Anti-Crisis Conference, and the innovation last month of the Eurasian Media Forum. I think these are very promising developments, and this forum has become a very important part of the global economy and information structure in it, particularly with respect to drawing in regional issues and also the smaller countries that are not part of the G20. In one of the issues that's being talked about, of course, here is the anti-crisis issues. And in order to, this is a crisis, a great one, every speaker has mentioned it. We haven't had any explanations of why it existed. It's not quite clear that people know why the crisis existed. We know the subprime mortgage crisis, but it was something different from the housing issues that created the crisis. The Congress, U.S. Congress, issued an examination of it, and they concluded there were 10 reasons for the crisis, 10 causes of it, which is very close to saying that they don't know what the cause was. I think that in looking at this crisis, we see the problems of this crisis in preceding crises, and that in fact we've had crises all the way back to the breakup of Bretton Woods in 1971, because each one of the major crises has been associated with very significant exchange rate changes of major currencies. And right at the very beginning, 1971, at the Smithsonian Institution, the meeting that set up the dollar standard, a kind of dollar standard not convertible into gold, the price of gold was raised from $35 to $38. And within 1 month of that decision, prices went up the same proportion of oil, because oil producers had caught on to the fact that gold and oil were connected together. And then, of course, came the big crisis of 1994 and another one in 1979 when oil prices went up to $30 from that point. over that period, exchange rate changes were enormous. You had the dollar was going way down in the late 1970s and way up in the early 1980s. The Deutsche Mark, the dollar was 3.5 Deutsche Marks in 1975. It was 1.7 in 1980, and then 3.5 again in 1984. Over that period, you had the international debt crisis and the savings and loan crisis. In the 1990s, you had the Asian crisis, and that was caused by something that's very on our minds a little bit today, the soaring of the dollar and the fall of the Japanese yen. In 1995, the yen was 78. The dollar was 78 yen. In June 1998, it was 148. So there's this huge increase in the dollar, depreciation of the yen, and that was combined with the earlier 1994 devaluation of the RMB, caused the dislocation of currencies that led to the Asian crisis. Now we come to the recent crisis. What have exchange rates got to do with it? Well, what happened to exchange rates? We had 2007, the subprime mortgage crisis and the big issue of money by the European Central Bank and $95 billion in one day, and then or euros in one day, and then in 2 days you had $300 billion of money issued. But the crisis came in the next year, in a month, in September 2008. What was the cause? The cause of that was the soaring dollar. The euro was $1.64 in June, and in October 24th, it had fallen to $1.24 or $1.23 even. So there was a 30% increase in the price of the dollar over that period, and that's what undermined all the financial mortgage institutions in the United States, like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They were bailed out, and Lehman Brothers, which was not bailed out, and that was the major issue of the crisis. So exchange rate instability has been part of the system and part of the crises that have existed in the past. And we're going to have them again. It's going to come around. We don't know. Just in the last few months, we've had the depreciation of the yen again, which has already caused some murmurs in Asia. Is this a possibility of another Asian crisis? Well, maybe it's not going to be anything like that, but it's a worry that has to be looked at, and everybody in Asia should be looking at that issue to see what Japan has moved, maybe belatedly at long last, to a more sensible monetary policy, but that's going to have a spillover effect on the rest of the world. Well, if we look at the world today, suppose we look at the world today as a country. Could we imagine what it is? Well, there's 188 members of the International Monetary Fund, but 200 currencies in the world, maybe 175, something like that. But if it were a country, would you ever have that many currencies? No, of course, and you wouldn't. And these currencies moving in all kinds of directions, and the IMF still following a policy of pushing and persuading countries to have flexible exchange rates. But exchange rates have been the basic problem, because in long periods of history, the 2,000 years of our history since coinage was created, the system was always a monetary system based on one or both of the precious metals. And that idea was stable exchange rates for countries using the same metal. Bimetallism and the gold standard. You didn't have big systemic crises under the gold standard. You had some national crisis, but not systemic crisis. Under the Bretton Woods system of fixed exchange rates to the dollar, while the U.S. fixed the price of gold, you had national crises, but you didn't have systemic crisis until the final crisis that ended it, which was the undervaluation of gold and the fact that gold became undervalued and the system broke down. But now, could we go back to Bretton Woods again? Next year is the 70th anniversary of Bretton Woods. Could we go back to it? Oh, no, we couldn't, because the power configuration of the world has changed since then. In the Bretton Woods system, the dollar had a preponderance of in the world, much bigger than it is today. And in 1948, it had 70% of monetary gold in the world. Now it's only got 25%. It couldn't fix the price of gold anymore. Of course, there's 5.4 million ounces of gold in the world, about 950 million inside the monetary system. And that much of that could be drawn back into it, but I don't see any movement by people to re-enshrine gold again after it's been. But what the problem is that the dollar, which was the mainstream of the world economy under the Bretton Woods system, stopped being the mainstream as the euro area developed under the European monetary system in 1978, and then the creation of the euro in 1999, which created a focus for the non-dollar area of the world and created those two big blocks of the world that represent together 40% of the world economy. Now, if you could fix one exchange rate in the world, like a bimetallic system, fixing the price of gold and silver, if you could fix the dollar and the euro together, you'd again have a focus, a central weight in the world economy that could be an anchor for currencies. That's difficult to do because you have to get monetary cooperation between the United States and the Federal Reserve System and the European Central Bank, and they're not in the mood to do that. Part of the crisis part of the problem of the crisis in 2008 was when Europe needed desperately money, the American Central Bank insisted that Europe make a formal presentation of their need for it instead of just providing the extra money that was needed. Easier money in the part of the Fed would have saved so much of the turmoil of this whole crisis. Well, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Paul Volcker, argues that the global economy needs a global currency. That's one route to go, and that's one route. What I would suggest is that that with the upcoming meeting that President Nazarbayev said he's going to go to, the G20 meeting in St. Petersburg in September, that the issue of the international monetary system and how to improve it and how to make it so that it's not going to create these crises, but how to at least minimize them, make them less harmful than before. That would be a good thing to do, and to start up a committee that could eventually create a new form of a kind of, not a return to Bretton Woods. We're still under the order of Bretton Woods now. We're still in the Bretton Woods order, but the Bretton Woods system is gone. We need to reinvent a system that will work inside the new dispensation. And that's what I think I think the G20 is ideally suited to deal with it because it contains both the big countries and many of the major smaller countries. And that's the kind of work that has to be done, that has to be found, that can set the program forward to creating the system that will be a reformed kind of Bretton Woods system with all the necessary modifications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert Mandel. And that concludes this year's forum's opening ceremony. I thank you all on the stage for your inspiring remarks. I thank you in the audience for sharing these moments with us. And I can tell you that the World Anti-Crisis Conference will start right after the lunch break. But before I invite the panelists to remain on the stage for a family picture, thank you all, and I wish you a very fruitful week here in Astana. Thank you.